The drive to Kelowna takes 4 hours from Vancouver, and I made it in 3.5. I don't know why I was rushing. Nobody there was waiting for me. Nobody there was waiting for me. Nobody there wanted me. I'd told myself the whole way that I was going for my brother, that it was his wedding, not my father's event. And whatever my father thought of me had nothing to do with why I was sitting in that rental car watching the Okanagan Hills flatten out into vineyard rows and dry summer grass. I told myself a lot of things on that drive. Most of them were true. Some of them were the kind of thing you say to yourself because the alternative is turning the car around. My brother Liam was getting married on a Saturday in late August. The venue was a winery outside the city. White tents, long tables, the whole thing. My future sister-in-law, Renata, had been planning it for 2 years. I'd met her exactly 4 times. She seemed warm enough. She'd texted me personally to make sure I had the right directions, which was more than my parents had done. I found out about the wedding from Liam 3 months before. He'd sent me a message that just said, "We're doing it August 24th, Kelowna. I hope you can make it." 7 words of hope. I wrote back the same day. I said I'd be there. I hadn't been home in 19 months. That's the part that sounds bad when I say it out loud, and I understand why. 19 months is a long time to stay away from the people who raised you. But the people who raised you can also be the people who make staying away feel like the only option that doesn't cost you something you can't afford to lose. My father is a man who has very specific ideas about what a life should look like. His own life looked like this: engineering degree from UBC, corporate job in Calgary, house in the suburbs with a good school district, 2 children who would presumably follow the same general trajectory. My brother did. He's a civil engineer now, works for a firm in Kelowna, owns a house. My father talks about Liam the way some people talk about a well-executed plan. I did not follow the trajectory. I joined the RCMP at 22. I don't think my father ever forgave me for it. The day I told him, we were sitting at the kitchen table in Calgary, and he looked at me the way you look at something that's confused you, something that isn't behaving the way it's supposed to. He said, "That's not what I had planned for you. Not what he'd imagined, not what he'd hoped, what he'd planned." As if I were a column in a spreadsheet that had entered an incorrect value. My mother was quieter about it. She wasn't cruel. But she followed his lead in most things, and his lead was disappointment, so that's what I got. Polite, consistent, low-grade disappointment, so that's what I got. Polite, consistent, low-grade disappointment. The kind you stop noticing after a while, the way you stop noticing a draft from a window that won't seal properly. Over the years, they'd adjusted their story of me. I had gone to the police, which my father said the way other people say someone had gone off the rails. There was always a slight pause before he answered when relatives asked about his daughter. Always a pivot toward Liam. I had learned not to take it personally. Then I had learned that not taking it personally was its own kind of exhaustion, and so I had stopped going home as often, and then I had stopped going home at all. And then 19 months had passed, but Liam had asked, and Liam had always been kind to me in the quiet way that younger siblings sometimes are, not defending you loudly but never joining in against you either. So I drove to Kelowna. I arrived the night before the wedding and checked into a hotel downtown. I hadn't asked to stay with my parents. They hadn't offered. We had exchanged 2 text messages about the whole trip, one where I confirmed I was coming, one where my mother said, "Okay, see you there." 2 messages in 3 months. That was the full extent of it. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon. I got there early, which I always do. I found a seat near the back of the white tent, next to a couple I didn't know who turned out to be friends of Renata's family from Penticton. They were friendly. We talked about the heat and the view. The vineyard sloped down behind the tent toward the lake, and the late afternoon light was doing something generous with the water. I sat there thinking that it was a genuinely beautiful place to get married and that my brother had done well for himself, and I felt something uncomplicated for a few minutes. Then my father arrived. He saw me almost immediately. The tent wasn't large. He stopped walking when he registered me just for half a second, and then he kept moving, and he sat down near the front without coming over. My mother followed behind him and glanced back once. She gave me a small wave that seemed more like an apology than a greeting. I stayed in my seat. The ceremony was lovely. Renata cried a little. Liam cried a little, which I hadn't expected, and it made me press my lips together and look at the lake until I had myself sorted. The officiant said the usual things, but in a way that felt personal. Someone in the row ahead of me laughed softly at one point and then reached for their partner's hand. I watched my brother become a husband, and I thought, at least I made it. At least I'm here for this. Afterward, cocktail hour on the lawn. I got a glass of wine I didn't particularly want, and stood near the edge of things, the way I do at events where I'm not entirely sure of my footing. Liam found me first. He hugged me hard and said, "You actually came," and I said, "I told you I would." He introduced me to some of his friends from work, and we talked for a while, and for maybe 20 minutes I forgot to be on edge about anything. Then my father found me. He came across the grass with his wine glass, and something in his posture told me before he'd even opened his mouth that this wasn't going to be a pleasant check-in. He stopped about 2 feet away, close enough to be private, far enough to be formal. And he looked at me the way he'd looked at me at that kitchen table 12 years ago. "What are you doing here?" he said. I looked at him. "I'm at my brother's wedding. I mean, standing here, alone, looking like you've never met anyone before. You've been lurking at the edge of things since you arrived." He glanced around. "You didn't even come say hello to your mother." "She didn't come say hello to your mother. She didn't come say hello to me either." He exhaled. That particular exhale, the one that means he's about to tell me something for what he considers to be the 100th time. "Your mother was trying to get settled. She's been managing a lot of the logistics this week. You could have made the effort." "I drove 4 hours," I said. "I made the effort." He looked at me for a moment, and I could see him deciding something. He set it aside. He said, "You look tired. You always look tired. Is everything okay with work?" He almost couldn't say the word. He got about halfway there and rerouted. "Work is fine," I said. "Still doing the same thing?" "Yes." Another exhale. Look, I'm not going to get into all of this today. It's Liam's day. I just think it would be nice if you made more of an effort to be part of the family instead of standing over here like a visitor." "I'm standing over here," I said carefully, "because when I walked in, you walked to the front without saying hello, and I didn't want to intrude. I didn't see you until I was already—" "You stopped walking," I said. "When you saw me, for about half a second, you stopped." He didn't answer that. He had the grace to look, for a moment, something close to embarrassed. Then he looked past me toward the main tent, where the dinner tables were being set, and he said, "You know, people have been asking about you, what you're doing. I never know what to tell them." "Tell them the truth," I said. "The truth isn't—" He stopped again. "It's hard to explain. What you do. People have expectations. Our family friends, the colleagues who are here, they ask what my daughter does, and I say you work for the RCMP, and there's always this." He made a vague gesture. "You were so bright. You could have done anything." "I know," I said. "I chose this. You chose to be—" He lowered his voice. "A constable." The word came out like something he'd had to work up to, like he'd been holding it back behind his teeth. A constable. As if it were something shameful. As if the people I'd worked alongside for 11 years, the calls I'd taken at 2 in the morning, the files I'd closed, the things I'd seen and kept seeing long after, as if none of that amounted to anything because the title at the top of the org chart didn't impress anyone at his firm's Christmas party. "Yes," I said. "And I'm good at it. I'm not saying you're not, Dad." I kept my voice even. I'd had a lot of practice. "It's Liam's wedding. Let's not do this today. I'm not doing anything. I'm trying to have a conversation with my daughter, which you don't make easy. You were gone for over a year without—" "I'm here now," I said. He looked at me. I looked back at him. All around us, people were moving toward the tent for dinner, and there was the soft sound of glasses and shoes on grass, and someone laughing at something on the far side of the lawn. "The seating at dinner," he said. "I arranged it. There wasn't a place set for you at the family table. I felt it like a slow drop in pressure, not sharp, just a steady descent." "What do you mean?" When Renata was sending RSVPs, I wasn't sure you were coming. And then when you confirmed it was late and the table was already set and I didn't, he paused. There are other tables. You'll be fine at one of the other tables. I looked at him for a long moment. I wanted to say several things. I chose none of them. Okay, I said. Fine. It's just logistics, he said. He sounded almost convincing. I know, I said. I turned. I was already calculating. Dinner at a table with strangers was fine, it was survivable. I'd eaten at tables with strangers in worse circumstances. I could do this, I could get through the dinner and say goodbye to Liam and drive back and be done with. Excuse me. The voice came from my left. I turned. Renata's brother was standing there. I'd met him briefly at the cocktail hour. His name was Marcus. He was a few years older than Renata. He'd been in the army for most of his adult life and had the bearing to prove it. He was in a suit now, not a uniform, but he held himself the way people do when they're accustomed to a certain kind of posture being the natural state. He was looking at me, not at my father. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded very calm. I just wanted to come and introduce myself properly. Marcus, Renata's brother. I know, I said. We met earlier. I know who you are, he said. And then he looked at my father. I don't think we've met properly, sir. Marcus Tran. I was with the RCAF for 14 years. He paused. Your daughter and I were talking earlier about her work. I had some questions. He looked back at me. Superintendent, I was wondering if you'd mind sitting with our family at dinner. Renata specifically asked me to make sure you were comfortable. The word landed in the middle of the grass like something dropped from a height. Superintendent. My father went very still. I saw it happen, the word hitting him, then the recalibration, then the very specific blankness that a person gets when they've suddenly realized they may have made a significant error. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Marcus. He looked at me. He looked at Marcus again. Superintendent? He said. Marcus nodded. We were talking earlier about the E division. He glanced at me. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. No, I said. It's fine. It wasn't quite fine. My hands were very steady, which is what happens when I'm working very hard to keep them that way. You're a superintendent, my father said. He was not asking. Yes, since when 18 months ago, I said. He processed this. In the RCMP, superintendent is senior. It's not the top, but it is far from the bottom. It means files, oversight, responsibility for other officers, direct reporting lines to people who matter. It means the thing he'd written off had turned into something he would have been proud of in anyone else's child. You didn't tell me, he said. I didn't think you'd want to know, I said. And then, because I needed to say it clearly, not cruelly, but clearly, you've never asked about my work, Dad. Not once, not in 11 years. The couple from Penticton were nearby and trying very hard to appear interested in the vineyard. A few other guests had slowed on their way toward the tent. My father looked like a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't seen coming. Marcus said quietly, "The offer stands if you'd like to join us for dinner." I thanked him. I told him I would. I walked toward the tent without looking back. I heard my father say my name once, not loudly, and I kept walking. Not because I was angry, I was past angry, somewhere quieter than that, but because I had said what needed to be said, and anything after it would have been for his benefit, not mine. Dinner was good. Marcus's family were warm and funny and asked me the kind of questions that people ask when they're genuinely curious. His wife had a laugh that took over her whole face. His teenage son asked me very seriously whether I thought he should consider a career in law enforcement, and I told him very seriously that it depended on what he wanted his life to feel like, and he seemed to find this answer satisfying. I watched Liam and Renata from across the room. They were moving between tables, and at one point Liam caught my eye and raised his glass, and I raised mine back. Halfway through dinner, my mother came and sat in the empty chair beside me. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. Then she said, "Your father told me about what you are now." "Yes, I didn't know. I know you didn't." She was quiet again. Then, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I think we made some assumptions." Her voice was careful. She was choosing things. I would have liked to have known. I would have liked to have been there when you were promoted." I looked at her. She looked, for the first time in a long time, like she was seeing me clearly. Not the version of me that had diverged from the plan. Not the one that made my father pause when relatives asked. Just me, her daughter, who had driven 4 hours to be at her son's wedding, who had been good at something for 11 years without anyone from this family ever asking what that something was. "There'll be other things," I said, "if you want to be there." She nodded. She pressed her hand over mine briefly, and then she got up and went back to her table. I stayed until the dancing started. I watched my brother pull Renata onto the floor for the first song, and I thought, this is why I came. For this exact moment, this particular version of my brother's face, I found Liam before I left. I hugged him and told him she was wonderful, which was true, and he said he knew, which was also true. He walked me to the parking lot and we stood by my rental car and he said, "Dad called me," during dinner. I figured, he sounded, I don't know, he sounded off. "He's okay," I said. "We talked." "Yeah?" "It's a long conversation," I said. "Years long, but maybe it got started tonight." Liam looked at me in the way he'd been looking at me since he was old enough to notice things. "I'm really glad you came." "I told you I would," I said. I drove back to Vancouver the next morning. The hills were gold in the early light, the way they get in late August when the summer is starting to think about ending. I had the windows down for the first part of the drive, through the valley where the air was still warm and smelled like dry grass and something floral I couldn't identify. I didn't have any particular feeling about what had happened. Not triumph. I hadn't wanted that. Not relief exactly, though some of that was there. Mostly I just felt clear. The way you feel when you've been carrying something at an awkward angle for a very long time, and then you shift your grip. And the weight is the same, but suddenly you're carrying it correctly. I'd spent 11 years being good at something in a room where nobody from my family was watching. I'd stopped needing them to watch. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that they'd seen it, finally, by accident, through the eyes of a stranger at a wedding in August. I don't know yet what my father will do with what he learned. He's a man who values his plans, and his plan for me had been written a long time ago. Rewriting takes effort. It takes a kind of humility that I don't know if he has. Not because he's a bad person, he isn't, not really, but because being wrong about something for 11 years is a lot to absorb in a single evening. My mother texted me 3 days after I got home. She asked if I wanted to come for Thanksgiving. She said my father thought it would be nice. I read it twice. I typed an answer and deleted it and typed it again. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." I meant it. I've always been someone who means what they say. That's the thing about this work, the one my father couldn't say the name of for so long, the one that made him pause at dinner parties and reroute the conversation. It teaches you, if you let it, to mean what you say, to be where you said you'd be, to show up, even when showing up is the harder option. I showed up to that wedding in Kelowna, and whatever comes next, whatever long, slow, years-long conversation is just starting between my father and me, I'll show up for that too. I've thought about that August evening a lot since I drove back to Vancouver. Not obsessively. I'm not built for obsession, but in the quiet way you turn something over when you're trying to understand what it actually meant. Here's what I keep coming back to. My father didn't become a different person that night. He didn't have some sudden transformation standing there on the lawn with his wine glass. What happened was smaller than that, and also more important. He saw something he'd refused to look at for 11 years and he couldn't unsee it. That's not a miracle. That's just cause and effect finally catching up. Because that's how it works, I think. Not in any dramatic, faded way. Just the plain, unglamorous mechanics of it. The choices we make accumulate. My father spent over a decade choosing to look away from who I was becoming, and that choice accumulated into a man who didn't have a seat for his daughter at his son's wedding. My choice. To keep doing the work. To keep showing up. To not shrink myself to fit his idea of what I should have been. Accumulated into something too. Into 11 years of quiet competence that a stranger named Marcus recognized across a lawn before my own father did. Neither of us planned it that way. That's sort of the point. I think about the version of me who might have made different choices, who might have softened, apologized, found a way to be less inconvenient, who might have left the RCMP at year 3 when my father made one of his comments at Christmas and I drove home afterward with my hands tight on the wheel. That version of me might have earned her seat at the family table. She would have lost something else entirely. What I've learned, not from that one evening but from the whole 11 years that led to it, is that integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. It's what you do when the audience has already walked away. My father walked away from caring about my career a long time ago. I kept going anyway, not to prove something to him, but because the work mattered and because I was good at it, and because both of those things were true regardless of whether anyone in my family was paying attention. That's the intelligence piece, I think, knowing the difference between what matters and what just feels urgent. My father's disapproval felt urgent for years, but what actually mattered was the file on my desk, the officer I was mentoring, the decision I had to make at 6 in the morning when everything was still uncertain. Keeping those things separate took practice. It still does. And the resilience. Liam said I seemed tired when he saw me. He was probably right. This kind of thing is tiring. Not the work itself, but the long, slow project of continuing to be yourself inside a family that has decided you are something else. That takes a stubbornness that I don't think gets talked about enough. Not the loud kind. The quiet, daily kind. The kind that just keeps driving 4 hours to a wedding because your brother asked, even when the welcome on the other end is uncertain. My mother texted about Thanksgiving. My father thought it would be nice. I'm going. Not because everything is fixed. It isn't, and pretending otherwise would be a different kind of dishonesty. But because showing up, even when it's complicated, is the thing I know how to do. It always has been.